just gonna go with the flow on this one. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. 2024 has come and gone, and now that the Oscars video insanity's over, and I've had a few months to finish catching up on most of the year's noteworthy releases, it's time to talk about my top 10 films of 2024. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content, like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. As has been the case the last couple years, we had a nice mix of smaller independent movies and big blockbusters and franchise films this year, so there was definitely something for everybody, and plenty of things for me. As anticipated, this was a very challenging list to narrow down, and then an even harder one to place in order. I had several 4.5 paw films this year, which is pretty rare for me, and even more rare is the elusive 5 paw rating, which one film on this list managed to get after a couple rewatches. In fact, this was a strong year overall, so there are a lot of great movies that just missed the cut for this list that could easily be on here if I'd done my ranking on a different day or if I was in a different mood. Feel free to take a look at my 2024 rankography list over on Letterboxd to see all of the films, but please keep in mind that most of the movies in the middle of the list are not very precisely ranked, so there's a lot of fluidity in there. Okay, so the usual disclaimers. I did not see every single movie that came out in 2024. I certainly tried, but I've only seen a hair over 200 feature-length 2024 releases at the time of filming this video, so this list is obviously gonna exclude movies that I haven't had a chance to see yet. You guys also know that I'm a stickler when it comes to official release year, so this list will only consist of movies with 2024 release dates. So that means there are a few that came out last year that I really liked that didn't make the list because they're technically 2023 movies and made last year's list. And there's also one on here that isn't gonna get a wide release until the summer of 2025 that made this list because it's officially a 2024 movie. The other thing to keep in mind is that these are my personal top movies of the year. There are a lot of qualities that could make a movie the best, but the movies on this list are included and ranked according to how much I enjoyed them. Remember, these are just my top movies, not the top movies, so be sure to post your own personal top 10 movies of 2024 in the comments below. I've already reviewed most of these movies on this channel, so if you want to check those out for some more in-depth thoughts on each of them, I'll put links in the description below, and also link some of them up in the cards as we go along. Alright, let's get this top list started. As usual with my end of the year list, I wanted to kick things off with 3 honorable mentions that didn't quite make the top 10. Sometimes it's easy to pick these movies, but I've gotta say that this was a very challenging year, and there were another 4 films that just missed this honorable mention cut. So, the number 3 honorable mention is The Fall Guy, directed by David Leitch. Very loosely based on the 80s action TV show of the same name, this follows a stunt guy, played by Ryan Gosling, trying to reconnect with his ex-girlfriend slash now director, played by Emily Blunt, while simultaneously getting caught up in a mysterious conspiracy involving the actor he doubles for. I'll be honest, I had never seen the original TV show before watching this movie, but the premise intrigued me. And the fact that we had a movie about a stunt guy being directed by a stunt coordinator definitely drew me in. Obviously, the stunt work in this film is fantastic, with big practical effects, including one that broke the Guinness World Record. The story and mystery get a bit convoluted, but the tone manages to really work if you're in sync with it. This is an action comedy with a heavy dose of rom-com, and a side of screwball comedy. I actually wasn't expecting the rom-com elements to be as much of a focus as they were, but it was really enjoyable, with some great playful banter and excellent chemistry between Gosling and Blunt. Really, this was just a fun movie. Light and entertaining, funny and endearing, just a fun time at the movies, and an ideal summer blockbuster. The second honorable mention is The Life of Chuck. So I had previously mentioned that there was one movie on here that was gonna get a wide release in 2025. This is the one. I saw this at TIFF last year, and in fact, it won the People's Choice Award, yet for some reason, Honora, Neon picked it up and then decided to hold on to it. So this one isn't getting a wide release until this summer. That said, it's a 2024 movie, and I saw it in 2024, so it's making the list. Directed by Mike Flanagan and based on a Stephen King short of the same name, this isn't a horror film like you might be expecting with that writer-director combo, and is instead more of a drama with sci-fi touches. Told in a linear but reversed style, it focuses, unsurprisingly, on the life of one Charles Krantz, played by Tom Hiddleston. To be honest, this is a movie that's really hard to describe. It has a plot, but it's not really one that you can explain without the context of the film itself. I know that probably sounds weird, and it's surely not a satisfying explanation for someone who hasn't seen the movie yet, but this is one that I think you just gotta go and experience. It might take you a little bit of time to get a handle on the structure and what's actually going on, but once you do, man, is this an impactful film. The movie makes brilliant use of its structure to tell a life-affirming and emotional tale that, as you will realize, is very, very important, contains multitudes. I can tell you that this is a movie that's gonna grow on me with rewatches, so if you're watching this video a year or more down the line, you could probably just imagine that this movie is a little bit higher up in my real top 10 list. The final honorable mention this year, and the one that just missed the top 10 cut, is September 5. So if you're not a big Oscar person, there's a decent chance that you've never heard of this one. It got a limited and kind of strange staggered release, so I didn't even get a chance to see it until February of 2025, and even that was only because it was nominated for Best Original Screenplay at this year's Oscars. This film is a historical thriller about the Israeli hostage crisis at the 1972 Olympics in Munich. Now, you might be thinking, we already have Spielberg's Munich, so what's the draw for another one of these? Well, this film approaches things from a very interesting perspective, because it takes place within the ABC Sports control room. This is a journalism film first and foremost. It follows the sports people, the commentators and journalists and producers who were already there for the Olympics, and just happened to be the people available on site to capture the unfolding events live. Yes, it's about the actual crisis, but it's more about news coverage and the unpredictability of it, and trying to sort out the ethics of covering something like this live, which up until then had never happened before. This was an unprecedented journalistic event. This is really a script and performance type of movie, so I do think a lot of people might find the film a bit dry and methodical, but personally, I was extremely captivated by it and gripped by the tension. Not bad for a story that we all already know the ending to. Coming in at number 10, The Substance. Well, after the last movie, here we've got one that everybody knows. Directed by Coralie Fargeat, who gave us the brutal and satisfying Revenge in 2017, this film was a multiple Oscar nominee and won Best Makeup and Hairstyling. Not to mention the People's Choice Award for Midnight Madness at TIFF, where I first saw the film. The Substance tells the story of an aging fitness celebrity, played by Demi Moore, who decides to use a mysterious black market drug in an effort to revitalize her career and her body. But this drug works in unique ways and has some pretty gruesome consequences for misuse. And since this film's a body horror, you just know that it's gonna get misused. This is one wild ride of a film. It's thematically strong and very unsubtle about it, but it works. This is really part high-concept sci-fi, part disturbing body horror, and all blistering social commentary. The body horror is probably the biggest draw for most people, and it's great here, offering up something that's slick and stylish, but gruesome and disturbing at the same time. It gradually builds, giving us stages of fable-esque transformation before letting the reins go entirely for the wild third act. That third act tonal shift is a bit over the top, but it's certainly fun. Perhaps unexpected for a horror movie, the performances are another big draw here, particularly the twisted symbiotic relationship at the heart of the story between Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley. They both give it their all, embracing this unglamorous madness and duality of the intense script. Demi Moore is especially great here, giving what may very well be a career best performance, and one that I think was certainly deserving of the Oscar. Coming in at number 9, Civil War. Well, apparently it's the year of journalist stories for me, I guess. Despite being a big topic for conversation initially, this is a movie that, interestingly, fell by the wayside not long after its release. Something that's all the more ironic considering how much more thematically relevant it is now than it was even then. Directed by Alex Garland, this film focuses on a team of journalists as they make their way to Washington, D.C. amidst a violent Second American Civil War. This is definitely a bit of a different kind of movie for Garland. There's no slick sci-fi here, and even though it still makes you think like most of his movies do, this is just a bigger movie in every way. At the time of its release, it was the most expensive A24 production ever, and certainly used that big budget. Despite some very involved and explosive scenes, it's not quite an action film, but rather a very tense war movie that retains the unsettling nature of Garland's previous stories. This is a visceral and extraordinarily tense film, featuring some excellent sound design that makes it even more so. Interestingly, this is a war film that's not actually about the war or any specific viewpoints, but rather about the people themselves. We're never told what started the war, or anything about the ideologies of people on either of the sides. Instead, this is fundamentally a human story. It's remarkably apolitical for a movie called Civil War, focusing on people's various reactions to war rather than the politics of war. It doesn't explicitly say anything about the state of partisan politics, but it sure is a lot to say about the state of humanity. Coming in at number 8, A Quiet Place, Day 1. I'll admit that I was skeptical about this one from the beginning. I really loved A Quiet Place Parts 1 and 2, but this was going to be so different. It was a prequel, following different characters in a different location, directed by a completely different director, Michael Sarnowski rather than John Krasinski. This franchise has always been predicated on a simple yet timeless horror movie premise: stay quiet or you die. It's a tense concept, but one that could become repetitive or even boring without characters to connect with and care about. The original A Quiet Place movies had put in that work and endeared us to this family of characters that made it easy to connect and care beyond the scares. So, I was hesitant about this film's shift to completely new characters. But luckily, this one manages to do it again. This film follows Sam, played wonderfully by Lupita Nyong'o, a terminal cancer patient traversing day 1 of the A Quiet Place apocalypse in the once noisy and bustling New York City, with her exceptionally well-behaved service cat, Frodo. Because of Sam's unique position, this isn't the typical quest for survival we've seen before, yet it still ends up being a very moving story with that key human element to it. The sound design, of course, is extremely impressive and integral here. It's such a tense movie, and that jarring transition from silence to roaring thunder as the stampedes of creatures run by is extremely unsettling. There are certainly some frustrating and dumb character decisions, which is par for the course with this franchise, but this still manages to be a tense and engaging story on multiple levels. It's certainly sweeter, more heartfelt, and much more life-affirming than your typical post-apocalyptic horror movie. Plus, this features one of the best cat performances I've ever seen. Coming in at number 7, Inside Out 2. Well, we've reached our first animated film on the list, but it's definitely not the last. This Oscar-nominated Pixar sequel is another film that I had some initial trepidation about. I suspected that it would be good, but I was a little nervous, because outside of the Toy Story franchise, I haven't been the biggest fan of most of Pixar's sequels. Luckily, Inside Out is the perfect type of story for a sequel. We get to follow Riley into a new stage of her life, this time, puberty. This film certainly benefits from the world building and established characters of the first movie, but it greatly adds to all of that. We get some more of those instantly recognizable, intangible concepts being made into entertainingly tangible things. The stream of consciousness, the connotation-changing sarcasm, the desolate back of the mind, even stuff as existential and complex as belief systems and one's sense of self get identifiable physical manifestations here. Riley's 5 core emotions are back here, along with some new teenage additions, most notably anxiety. There's definitely some repetition with the plot beats within Riley's mind, but I think this movie gives us a better plot split than the first film, with us spending more time with Riley on the outside. She feels like an actual character this time around. The Riley storyline is still centered around some ordinary preteen coming-of-age stuff, but it's so relatable. Like its predecessor, Inside Out 2 provides us with another impactful and thematically strong addition to the Pixar filmography. Particularly, the characterization of anxiety and her effect on Riley is really impressive, contributing to the universality of this extremely resonant film. Coming in at number 6, Conclave. Well, here we've got another multiple Oscar nominee and the winner of Best Adapted Screenplay, plus one of my favorite films from TIFF this year. Directed by Edward Berger and based on the novel of the same name by Robert Harris, this movie focuses on a cardinal who's been tasked with leading the selection of the new pope. As all of the voting cardinals gather in the Vatican, revelations, scandal, and conspiracies emerge, threatening to disrupt the process. So, a movie about the election of a new pope might not sound like the most intriguing thing, but you'd be wrong. This isn't some stuffy religious drama. Instead, it's a dramatic religious mystery thriller, a conspiratorial investigation film, and even a bit of a political thriller at times. I know I'm placing this only in the sixth spot, but from an overall filmmaking perspective, I think this might be the best crafted film of the year for me. Methodical pacing, fantastic cinematography, meticulous costume and production design, a harshly percussive string-based score that was one of my favorites from last year, an excellent screenplay, wonderful performances. This has really got it all. It's a gripping, dramatic thriller about faith, doubt, and the dangers of secrecy. It deftly navigates the intricacies of organized religion, showcasing the value of tradition and process, while also highlighting the necessity for plasticity and evolution of thought. This film is overloaded with too many great performances to mention here, but I was particularly fond of Stanley Tucci's blend of humor and pragmatism. The undeniable standout performance, however, is Ralph Fiennes as Cardinal Lawrence, the man tasked with overseeing the conclave. As a character that's trying to maintain tradition and procedure while simultaneously grieving and attempting to seek truth, Fiennes delivers a very layered performance, full of inner conflict, strength, and even humor. In a career full of fantastic performances, this may very well be one of his finest. Coming in at number 5, Heretic. Doing a bit of a thematic 180 from the last film here. Co-directed by Scott Beck and Brian Woods, this is a psychological horror thriller and dark comedy starring Hugh Grant, Sophie Thatcher, and Chloe East. It tells the story of two young Mormon missionaries whose faith is put to the test when they try to convert a man who's got other, more devious plans. So the further we get into this list, the more I realize how much I really loved TIFF last year. There were just so many movies that appealed directly to my genre interests and sensibilities. Honestly, this was the perfect kind of horror movie for me. Equal parts profound, playful, and perturbing, this is a clever horror thriller that explores religion, belief, and the iterative nature of human constructs. Hugh Grant oozes creepy charm here, but Thatcher and East are also wonderful as two characters who are much smarter than your typical horror movie cannon fodder. It's a cerebral and surprisingly thought-provoking game of cat and mouse that uses its chills as an excuse to examine human nature and the concept of faith. But it's also an extremely entertaining and darkly humorous film, much more so than the trailer would have you believe. It's definitely a wordy and dialogue-driven story, which might irritate some people, but it really worked for me. Between the great screenplay, the excellent performances, and the unexpectedly fun and darkly funny nature of the film, this ended up being my favorite horror movie of the year. Coming in at number 4, The Wild Robot. What's that? Another TIFF movie, you say? The trend continues. This was definitely one of my biggest pleasant surprises of the festival. I figured I'd enjoy it, but had no clue I like it this much. Directed by Chris Sanders, The Wild Robot is a DreamWorks animated sci-fi survival drama. Based on a book series of the same name, it tells the story of Roz, a helper robot who's accidentally lost during shipping. She finds herself on an island uninhabited by humans, and in search of purpose is assigned the task of raising an orphan gosling. It's certainly predictable with its story beats, and is a touch saccharine at times, but the darkly playful humor, the impactful themes, and especially the stellar animation make this one of the standouts of the year. I'm so glad that TIFF showed this one in IMAX, because that's definitely the way to see this beautiful animation. It's got a painterly hand-drawn style that's reminiscent of Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, but makes it its own, with an organic textured softness to it all. It also uses some clever visual storytelling, with Roz initially being animated in a clean, slick CGI style, before eventually being animated in a much warmer, hand-drawn style that reflected her figurative transformation in a very literal way. Expertly blending heart and humor, this is a heartwarming and thematically layered story about parenthood, found family, self-acceptance, and finding one's purpose. I'm somebody who's found DreamWorks to be a little hit or miss with their animation as of late, but I can confidently say that this film is one of my favorites and absolutely near the top of DreamWorks' animated output. Coming in at number 3, My Old Ass. Hey, we've got one that isn't a TIFF movie. It is a Sundance movie, though. This was a film that initially captured me with its intriguing premise. It focuses on an 18-year-old girl who encounters the 39-year-old version of herself during a mushroom trip the summer before college, and she receives some cryptic advice from her older self. With a name like My Old Ass, this certainly sounds like it's going to be some goofy teen comedy, but it ended up being one of the more entertaining and emotionally hard-hitting coming-of-age stories I've seen in a long time. It presents us with an age-old thought question. What would you say to your 18-year-old self? That general premise is great, as are the sort of inexplicable sci-fi elements, but this film has the plot and story execution to back it all up on the follow-through. It maintains a simple but compelling mystery element regarding the reasoning for the advice, so it does manage to keep you invested from a story perspective. And then we've got the performances. Maisie Stella and Aubrey Plaza are great here as the two Elliots. They're far from physical doppelgangers of one another, but their personalities align and mesh in a very believable way. They really nailed this strange, very specific type of chemistry in an entertaining yet profound way. My Old Ass is a nostalgically heartfelt film that makes you think about your own life choices. It explores the idea of generational divides, but manages to bridge those gaps at the same time, presenting us with a deeply resonant story about the choices that shape who you become. Coming in at number 2, it's What's Inside. Okay, so I realize that this is probably the biggest outlier in my list. I saw this film at its premiere at Sundance last year, and it really captured me. It was one of my favorites of the festival, and I've been watching this sit near the top of my list all year long. Following its premiere, it was picked up and eventually released by Netflix last year, and I have to admit, I still haven't rewatched it. Not for any specific reason, I just haven't had time and have been prioritizing new movies over rewatches of recent films. So I will admit that it's possible that my thoughts on and ranked placement of this film would be a little different on rewatch, which I think is especially a factor with this particular story. But for now, I'm keeping it here in the second position based on that first watch. This is a sci-fi dark comedy horror, but it's one that you really want to go into as blind as possible. I don't want to spoil anything about it for people, so I can't say very much about the plot, but this film follows a group of old college friends who reunite for a pre-wedding party, but a mysterious suitcase changes their plans and lives forever. So I want to say more, but I refuse to spoil it for anybody. In fact, that's part of why I never got around to reviewing it. It would have to be so vague, so I inevitably probably would have had to have done a spoiler review, which I don't really like doing. This is a high-concept thriller packaged within an unpredictable puzzle box of bubbling tension and crumbling relationships. It's really clever and a whole lot of dark fun, with some impressive, exceptionally creative writing, kinetic editing, and multi-layered performances, in a way you'd never guess. Maybe not a typical choice to be so high up in somebody's end-of-year ranking, but I really had a blast with this one, and I'm curious to see if it stands up on rewatch. So that means my number 1 movie of 2024 is Flow. For those of you who are regulars on this channel, this is probably the least surprising news you've heard all month. I have been singing this film's praises since I saw it at TIFF back in September. It was, unsurprisingly, my favorite of that festival, which, as we've already established throughout this list, had a really strong lineup this year. I gave Flow 4.5 paws after that initial TIFF watch, but I did see it 2 more times in theaters after that, and I've since bumped it up to the coveted and exceptionally rare 5 paws. Now, I knew that I'd like it, and figured I would love it, but I had no clue that this film was going to skyrocket to my number 1 position. Directed by Gins Balbalitis, this is a Latvian animated adventure fantasy. After a flood destroys the world, it tells the story of a cat who finds a small boat and unlikely companionship with a dog, a capybara, a lemur, and a secretary bird. This ragtag group must work together to survive their challenging new watery environment in a world completely devoid of humans. A compassionate look at animal behavior and friendship, this film is a beautifully and uniquely animated animal adventure. It's fittingly fluid in both style and story, and excels at immersive visual storytelling. There's no dialogue whatsoever, but words are truly unnecessary here, with this compelling and remarkably engaging tale of survival that holds you captivated by the plight of these animals. I'm so happy that Flow won Best Animated Feature at this year's Oscars, and I'm extremely excited for the 4K Criterion release coming out later this year. I will certainly be rewatching this masterpiece again and again. Alright, so there you have it. Those were my top movies of 2024. I have a feeling that this list probably looks a bit different from most people's, but that just goes to show the variety of great films 2024 had to offer. I've already reviewed most of these movies, so be sure to check those out if you want some more in-depth discussion of each, as well as my ratings, pros and cons, and even tailored film recommendations. And if you're interested in buying any of these movies, I do have affiliate links to most of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these 2024 movies. I'd also love to hear what your top 10 movies of 2024 were, so be sure to let me know in the comments below. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this top list, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're on it to see more videos like this, as well as movie reviews. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.